Hey, what's up? Welcome to a new episode of Games from Underground. It's never been easier to get your hands on extremely versatile and scalable game dev tools, and it's simpler than ever to use digital distribution to instantaneously transmit your digital creative exploits to PCs, consoles, phones, and tablets around the world. As a medium, games are more numerous, more popular, more accessible, more creative, and more profitable than never before. And yet, this industry has never been more bloated and choked by corporate mismanagement and greed than it is right now, and the trajectory doesn't seem to be inclined to course correct at any time. My gut tells me that if you're watching this video a few years from now, you'll be thinking, oh, you unsullied people of 2024, you have no idea how good you had it back then. It's gotten to the point where seemingly every week now a fresh crop of new horror stories from the industry emerges. Studios getting shut down, promising games being cancelled, and hundreds of hardworking creatives getting sacked and kicked to the curb. Which is exactly why it's so important to put a spotlight on the indies from time to time. Which is also why I've been meaning to bring this here series back for a good while. Games from Underground. It's been a few years since the initial 4-episode run, but they're still up. So go check them out if you feel like more after this. The aim of this series is to put a spotlight on compelling, fascinating, and outstanding indie games that are totally worth checking out for a multitude of reasons, and that are made by small and incredibly creative developer teams. That's what this series is all about. Titles that might have flown under most people's radar, while the latest studio-devouring quadruple-A monstrosities were busy sucking all the oxygen out of the room with their marketing budgets that dwarf a micronation's GDP. So, for episode 5 of Games from Underground, or maybe season 2, episode 1, call it whatever you like, it's not like I'm following some 4D chess strategy here, we'll be showcasing 4 games that share some very interesting and timely connective tissue indeed, a theme I like to call Hyperreality. These are games that are all, in one way or another, messing with a player's sense of place and self. In a destabilized version of reality, you're never truly certain whether what you're seeing is a disturbing hallucination, a conveniently manufactured fiction, or an actual horrific truth. And we couldn't have picked a better time to descend into the swirling and unfathomable miasma of hyperreality, as the year's autumnal equinox has just passed, which is a time when the veil between the worlds is paper thin. So what better way to kick off our first pick than jumping into the passenger seat of the 1981 Dodge Diplomat of one very special Agent Dale Bartholomew Cooper.
I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
What if Twin Peaks, but Silent Hill? Sounds like exactly the kind of madcap, creatively unconstrained, fever dream made real type of game that could only be done by a team of unhinged, ultra-passionate indie developers. And, well, that's exactly what Blue Rose Team has accomplished with Twin Peaks Into the Night. A game that's here to party like it's 1999, when survival horror was the hottest new kid on the block. This game was initially developed by Lucas Guibert and Jean Monzoni as an entry for a haunted PS1 demo disc compilation, but then grew into its own full-fledged fan game. It's an experience that can proudly stand alongside the many other excellent survival horror throwbacks we've been blessed with in recent years. The game you like is going to come back into style.
Diane, 11:30 a.m., February 24th. Entering the town of Twin Peaks. Never seen so many trees in my life. As W.C. Fields would say, I'd rather be here than Philadelphia.
Twin Peaks Into the Night is an absolutely immaculate retro recapitulation of David Lynch's cult classic surrealist 90s TV series, with a dash of the Fire Walk With Me movie added for seasoning. Now, it almost goes without saying that there's no shortage of games out there that bear the mark of the enormously outsized influence of Twin Peaks, including Silent Hill itself, which is heavily indebted to the show's ultra-specific vision of a sleepy North American town that sits at the interstice of the real world and the nightmarish otherworld. It's fair to say that the only thing as oversaturated in video games as H.P. Lovecraft is games that are inspired by Twin Peaks.
What, Night Springs? Come on, Linda, relax. It's not that bad.
But this fan game is something truly special for how effectively it takes the surrealist vibe of Twin Peaks and makes the intangible interactive via Silent Hill-inspired puzzle adventure gameplay, like to the point where the fonts, menu system, and UI are almost identical. It's uncanny. Of course, it also helps that this game makes extensive use of actual music and footage from the Twin Peaks TV show, perhaps best exemplified by the loving and lavish low-poly recreation of the opening credits. Eat your heart out, copyright laws. Naturally, the player assumes control of the show's protagonist, that paragon of positive masculinity and all-around heartthrob, baby girl Kyle MacLachlan, aka 1980 Paul Atreides, aka Special Agent Dale Cooper. Like the classic early 3D games of yore, Into the Night uses fixed position camera angles to anchor the player in the world, creating a strong and immediate sense of place that does proper justice to the source material's absolutely exquisite cinematography. Just like your Harry Masons and your Jill Valentines, the muddy and low-poly character models of Into the Night hit that perfect hauntological sweet spot of appearing stiff and marionette-like when they're standing still, and yet also deceptively smooth and humanistic while in motion. And working hand in glove with this game's fixed camera angles is the supreme quintessence of classic survival horror, that ultimate litmus test for true survival horror connoisseurs: tank controls. And speaking of retro pastiche, when I first booted the game up, I was struck right away by yet another key detail that demonstrated how Blue Rose team had really committed to creating a true golden age of survival horror throwback. Take a look at this scene. Can you see it? Here's a hint. This is just as much about what the game isn't showing you on screen as it is about what you can actually see. That's right, Twin Peaks Into the Night does not render the usual widescreen aspect ratio. This game exclusively displays in the glorious gods be damned 4:3 Academy ratio, like your favorite golden oldies on the PS1 and Super Nintendo, not to mention most TV shows released before the 2000s. It's a reminder that this game, just like Twin Peaks, is rooted in a lost and bygone era. A time when analog audiovisuals ruled the roost and TVs were both smaller and a lot heavier and sported those ubiquitous chonky bezels framing the edges of the screen in order to conceal where the curvature of the TV glass would warp the image. It was the pre-high definition era, when the distortion inherent to the medium could be used to artful effect, compelling the viewer to actively fill in the blanks with their own imagination. And it's an example of yet another connective thread between this game and its titular inspiration. Both Twin Peaks and Silent Hill were bold pioneers of their respective mediums. Both innovated their genres in revolutionary ways by leaning heavily into their technical limitations, working within and around these shortcomings to give audiences a totally unique and never-before-seen experience. As the saying goes, it's creative limitations that so often inspire the greatest works of art.
This is absolutely horrible. We never get any extra shots, we never get any time to experiment, we never get to, go dreamy or anything. We barely fucking make our days.
Just as Resident Evil and Silent Hill popularized survival horror, so too did Twin Peaks give rise to what we now call prestige TV. And it all comes full circle here in Into the Night. And hey, the hits just keep coming, because when you interact with a coffee machine in Into the Night, this game's version of the save point, we get to hear everyone's favorite, totally not done to death catchphrase from the show.
Say the line, Bart!
Damn good coffee.
This standalone/playable teaser is supposedly just a small taste of what's to come, with Blue Rose Team saying that they intend for the full game to cover most of the TV show's first season. And man, if the final release is anywhere near the level of quality of this 45-minute vertical slice, it's gonna be something amazing indeed. Twin Peaks Into the Night is available right now on itch.io for PC, Mac, and Linux. No Android or iOS versions though, so you can play this one on your
fucking telephone. Get real.
Alright, before we continue, I'd love to give a shout out to this video's sponsor, which is RocketMoney. In the current day and age of every single thing is a paid subscription, it's incredibly easy to lose track of the things your bank account gets regularly, automatically charged for. And it very easily becomes a black hole of personal finances. A few years ago, when I finally had a few days off, I sat down and decidedly looked into all the things I was paying monthly or yearly and cancelled everything that wasn't necessary at the time, and it made such a huge difference, like on the spot. The thing was, this was quite tedious and arduous, and this fact that it's easy to forget is something that companies bank on. It's easy for consumers to lose track of subscriptions, so you keep paying for stuff month by month you don't even remember. Plus, if you do decide to cancel a subscription, it's more often than not made hard on purpose for you so that people get discouraged from even dealing with it. It's a nightmare, honestly, and the expenses just keep piling up. This is where RocketMoney is a service I've really come to appreciate. RocketMoney is a personal finance app that, among other things, helps you actually keep track of your ongoing subscriptions, and often detects ones you've completely forgotten about, and it helps you get rid of that bureaucratic hassle once and for all. Now, a subscription service to exclusively cancel subscriptions would be a little ironic, right? But you can use RocketMoney for free, and it also offers a lot more. For instance, RocketMoney can help you lower your bills by negotiating with companies like ISPs, cable, phone, and just upload a photo of your bill and RocketMoney will help you get a better rate. It also keeps track of your credit, making sure that there's no unwanted, unpaid bills that wreck your credit score, and on top of that, offers a budgeting solution that helps you keep track of your finances in one convenient spot. It's used by over 5 million members and has helped its customers save up to $740 a year when using all the app's features, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. If you'd like to give it a try, go to rocketmoney.com/RagnarRox or use the link in the description to get started for free. You can also unlock extra features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/RagnarRox to get started for free. So, with this, thanks a lot to our sponsor, and now, let's get back to the indies. The Enigma Trilogy is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of a really excellent psychedelic cyberpunk horror adventure experience. Intense, atmospheric, mind-bending. I could work my way through the whole list of adjectives and superlatives, but it still doesn't feel like quite enough to do justice to this fascinating series. These games are, one and all, intensely disturbing and poignant allegories for what it's like to feel stuck inside of a manufactured artificial reality, unsure of one's true identity, and with no clear path to freedom. Which, hey, sounds like just a regular day in 2024. And since we're already deep into this liminal zone between reality and fantasy, let's switch things up a bit and collapse the limits of time and space. You know that kinda over-the-top thing that some works of fiction do? Where a character provides exposition to advance the narrative, but the scene is really also a way for the author to communicate directly with the viewer.
It's not whether you are right or wrong, but how much faith you are willing to have. That decides the future.
Hello there. I'm Michael Saba, Ragnar's co-writer and producer and occasional fourth wall shatterer. This recent trilogy of indie cyberpunk horror games from the solo developer James Gavin, aka Enigma Studio, blew me away, to the point where I felt like I just had to jump on the mic for this one and do my best poor man's Kojima impression by monologuing directly at you, dear viewer. The three games that make up the Enigma Trilogy, Enigma Machine, Mothered, and Echostasis, are some of the most intense, cerebral, and also spectacular in the literal sense of the word horror games that I've played in a long, long time. Now, at first glance, the Enigma Trilogy could easily be written off as a trend-chasing exercise in VHS horror, a genre that's honestly starting to feel a little bit oversaturated these days. We've already seen this all before. You know the score.
What's the prep? Shitty house, spooky sounds? Ooh, is it haunted?
But amidst this overweening Five Nights at Freddy's-ification of indie horror, the Enigma Trilogy presents itself as a far more refined experience. Like Into the Night, this series also emerged in part from the legendary Haunted PS1 demo disc. Echostasis got a prologue demo in the 2021 edition of the demo disc, and Mothered was featured in 2022's Spectral Mall compilation. In terms of presentation, these are uber-slick, first-person adventure puzzle games with a maximalist application of late 80s retro-flavored audiovisual effects and distortion. It's a wonderful example of, once again, making effective use of creative limitations, lending an astonishing sense of style and visual identity to otherwise simple graphical geometry and texture work. And that's not even mentioning the trilogy's killer soundtracks by Carl Barnes, which are all masterworks of punchy vaporwave and anxiety-inducing ambient synth noise. But deeper technological existentialist themes are roiling just underneath this pleasing surface, which gets us back to how the Enigma Trilogy creates a sense of communion between itself and the audience by speaking directly to the player through both the story and the gameplay. Since showing is always better than telling, the recent launch trailer for Echostasis, the trilogy's finale, illustrates this better than I could with just words.
For the past few years, you haven't been yourself. For years now, you have been waiting. Waiting for something. Something you don't quite understand. Something that can only be given by her.
All of this makes sense within the context of the game's narrative. This is a story about the psychological terror of synthetic reality, a conceit that can best be summed up as vaporwave gone wrong psychedelic algorithm horror. And yet, it's impossible to ignore that excerpts like this are also a not at all veiled message from the developer, communicating directly to you, the player, about how much it sucks to live on the internet in 2024.
For the past 3 years, your mind has been lost. Stuck in the cloud. Paralyzed by infinite truths. Why be a victim of someone else's reality when you can be the god of your own? I understand that all you want now is an end. An escape from a world that has long stopped making sense to you. Click here to make it all okay.
When I first played through the trilogy, I felt all of these words so deeply, it shook me to my core. And it clarified so many dark feelings and struggles I've gone through in recent years. The weight of the whole experience very nearly brought me to tears. For years now, us modern citizens of the information age have become submerged inside of an artificial, technologically mediated world of hyper-reality, where all of our ideas, emotions, and actions ring out with exponential force. And yet, it's all so insubstantial in the end, because none of it feels real, and nothing about life really makes sense anymore. As you scroll the web now on any given day, swiping and refreshing, how many times do you have to ask yourself, is what I'm looking at fake news? A deep fake video? AI art slop? Or is it actually real? And how am I supposed to tell the difference anymore? This is the very essence of hyper-reality, and why the Enigma Trilogy hits so close to home in 2024. This series sits at the exact intersection of the films of David Cronenberg, Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation essay, the same one that inspired The Matrix, and the Adam Curtis documentary Hyper-Normalization. And these themes are further magnified and reflected within the trilogy's overarching narrative. The chimeric Enigma Corporation, after having pioneered next-generation android technology and artificial intelligence, has realized their crowning achievement with the Echo, a VR simulation which uses AI to algorithmically create and curate perfect, idealized, individualized realities for its users. The Enigma Machine, the first game in the trilogy, is something of a proof of concept for both the mechanics of the games that follow and the larger story. As an aspiring Enigma raid agent, your job is to type bracketed keywords into a terminal to reveal a drip feed of story exposition, followed by sessions where you explore in first person an allegedly malfunctioning Echo. You're basically a glorified beta tester ahead of the product's wider rollout, QAing the world's deadliest version of the Day 1 patch. Mothered, a horror role-playing game, number 2 of the trilogy, takes a slightly different tack. At first glance, this more straightforward puzzle-adventure game has no apparent connection to its predecessor, aside from the judicious use of analog-style visual distortion effects. The player assumes the role of a young girl named Liana, who returns home with a bad case of amnesia after recovering from an unspecified major surgery, only to discover that her mother has seemingly been replaced by some kind of bizarre and horrific human-sized doll, capable only of jerky, marionette-like arm motions and equally stiff and robotic dialogue. Soon, you realize that absolutely nothing about this scenario is what it seems, including the role you, the player, were assigned. It's also worth pointing out that this game received a stealth sequel in the form of Mothered Home. After Mothered came out, but just ahead of the release of Echostasis, the developer stealthily, without putting out a press release or even so much as posting about it online, updated the demo version of Mothered that appeared in the 2022 Spectral Mall compilation. If you launch the updated demo after having completed the full game of Mothered, you'll unlock Home, an absolutely rip-shit psychedelic trip through the outer reaches of an artificial reality that's crumbling and de-resing before your very eyes. And finally, the trilogy finale Echostasis is where all of these themes, threads, and systems converge and combine. As the lead engineer of Enigma's Echo project, you find yourself trapped in their R&D center high atop their skyscraper HQ. Once again, you're entering bracketed keywords into a fabulously hauntological terminal, which drip feeds you the game's exposition and setting. Enigma Corp is facing a massive cyber attack, and the whole building has been placed under lockdown, which means the player is the only one who can save the 3 test subjects trapped inside prototypes of the company's VR bathyspheres. Doing so will require you to deploy Enigma's highly dubious and outright illegal Dreamscape Explorer, which allows you to initiate a not at all ominous-sounding cerebral hijack of the trapped Echo test subjects. Then, you dive directly into the fractured and ever-shifting realities of their unconscious subconscious. Here, Echostasis expands on the series' loop-driven puzzle-adventure gameplay by introducing a time attack mechanic. In addition to the exploration and Metroidvania-style unlocking of shortcuts to progress through the levels, you now must also take up your trusty pump-action rifle. By blasting away the coral-colored techno-zombies and creepy Evangelion rapture phantoms who inhabit the Echo, you add precious seconds to the constantly depleting level timer. And once the timer reaches 0, you're pulled out of the Echo and must start the level over again. A horror game with loads of exploration and backtracking, where you're disempowered against deadly enemies and must thoughtfully manage your limited and ever-depleting resources in order to progress. By definition, Echostasis is a fresh twist on the classic survival horror formula. I honestly can't remember the last time I had that "what the fuck am I playing?" feeling from a game like this. And trust me when I say that this is personally the highest compliment I can possibly give a game. At a moment when there's so much bad news around video games right now, the Enigma Trilogy arrived right on time to remind me exactly why I love this medium. So, if you're a fan of high-concept cyberpunk, cerebral horror games, and especially the intersection thereof, you absolutely need to play the Enigma Trilogy, which is available on Steam and itch.io. Because, at the end of things, this whole theme of art speaking directly to the player carries a double meaning here. It goes beyond just commentary on our algorithm-saturated lives, where our shared reality is breaking down as it becomes increasingly entangled with simulations. Losing yourself in the all-consuming pleasure of a virtual reality, especially as a form of escapism from an existence that's only become increasingly difficult and painful to deal with. That's not just internet and social media. That's video games too, bucko. And there's something very, very appropriate about the fact that a video game like this, an artificial, manufactured reality, is the one form of art that can fully examine and critique our real world post-truth existence of hypersaturated hyper-reality.
It's time to let go of what happened and say hello to the new you.
Well, speaking of hard-in-your-throat visions of reality gone to hell, the very name of our next game, Buckshot Roulette, tells you absolutely everything you need to know about the premise. Russian roulette, but with a pump-action shotgun instead of a revolver. Perfect. No notes. It's like that famous scene from The Deer Hunter, except now we're in a nondescript Eastern European warehouse discotheque competing for a briefcase full of greenbacks. And everyone involved in this freak show is all cranked up on ecstasy and crystal meth. Yeah, the Slavic gonzo thriller vibes of Buckshot Roulette are simply sublime. It's an ultra-violent carnival of self-destruction that constantly escalates the tension until things are at a literal edge-of-your-seat fever pitch. And the rules of the game only get more intricate as you go. You feeling lucky yet?
Buckshot Roulette is the perfect example of a game that does one thing and does it incredibly well. So it's no accident that a short, focused, and razor-sharp experience like this ended up being infinitely more impressive and popular than so many other recent blockbuster juggernauts who took the overstuffed jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none approach. Those 30,000 overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews don't lie. Things start off simple enough. 2 blank shells and 1 live shell, which the ghastly needle-toothed dealer loads into a shotgun in random order. Then you take turns choosing between aiming at the dealer or turning the barrel on yourself. Hitting the dealer with a live shell subtracts 1 of his health points, and vice versa. Turning the gun on yourself while a blank is chambered will skip the dealer's next turn, allowing you to take 2 or more turns in a row. But after depleting the dealer's health points and finishing the first round, round 2 begins. Now the game introduces randomized items each time the shotgun gets reloaded, which adds a good degree of variety and nuance to your decisions. You can use a magnifying glass to peek into the chamber to see if there's currently a live round loaded. You can saw the barrel off and double the damage for the next turn. You can guzzle a nice frosty pivot to rack and eject the chambered shell, or you can blast a quick classica sigaretti to restore a point of health. Of course, the dealer can also use the same items to do the same to you, and you'll very quickly realize that making effective use of these random joker items contra the dealer is the only way you can win at this game of death. What results from this is the marriage of calculating strategy to mitigate odds, like in a game of poker where you can know all the maths like a human calculator and still at least 50% of the outcome remains to the whims of chance.
Oh, that's fair enough.
In a lot of ways, the strategic back-and-forth rhythm of Buckshot Roulette reminds me strongly of Inscription, only with a 12 gauge instead of a deck of cards. Which, hey, shout out to Games from Underground episode 3, where I featured Sacrifices Must Be Made, the prototype that would eventually be expanded to become Inscription. And really, just like Sacrifices Must Be Made, Buckshot Roulette feels like the perfect proof of concept for an eventual full-length version. All the groundwork has already been laid by this tasty treat of a game, and expertly so. Also, it's worth noting that the game's creator, Mike Klubnica, is quite open and transparent about Daniel Mullins' games, i.e. the developer of Inscription and Sacrifices Must Be Made, being a major influence for its development. Where Buckshot Roulette really distinguishes itself in my book is how convincingly the dealer makes it feel like you're playing against a real opponent. I won't say a real human opponent because Jesus, look at this guy. But still, the game deserves a lot of praise here for how effectively it replicates the slow-burning tension of sitting across the proverbial poker table from a living, thinking opponent who's facing all of the same potential advantages and perils as you. The very fact that the dealer can make mistakes, sometimes wasting an item, shooting you with a blank when they seemingly should know better, or even blasting their face off with a live round. All of this only adds to the tension, where you really can't be certain of what's gonna happen next. Little touches like this, as well as the randomized nature of the shells and the wildcard items, prevent Buckshot Roulette from falling into the trap of feeling like a series of simple, rote, if-then choices. When it feels like anything could happen, every decision you make matters. The audio-visual presentation does a masterful job of amplifying this tension as well, and raises all sorts of interesting questions. Who are you? Why are you competing in this suicidal game? And what's the origin story of the dealer and his shit-eating grin? Sorry, lorehounds, you're out of luck here. You'll never get any answers to those dangling mysteries, because that isn't what we're here for. Buckshot Roulette isn't about to get bogged down with such trivial details. This is all about me and you dancing on the edge of life and death. You probably don't want to know anyways, because this dealer clearly isn't someone to be trifled with. Even the Lord Almighty played for keeps with this guy and lost. Buckshot Roulette may only take 30 minutes to complete. That's if you play flawlessly, win the first round, then go double or nothing, and stand your ground successfully all the way to the end to cash out a big chunk of dough, which isn't easy, and sometimes you'll just be plain unlucky. That's the game. Chances are you'll need at least a couple of attempts to make it through and live to tell the tale and spend the earnings. But even if it only takes you half an hour, then hot damn, what a spectacular half hour it is. Everyone loves posting that smug, shorter games with worse graphics meme these days, including myself, so supporting a game like this is one way you can prove it. It's available right now on Steam and itch.io, and for just 3 American buckaroos you really have nothing to lose. Besides a few vital organs, that is.
For this final part of the video, we're going to travel back a bit in time to what is perhaps the most phantasmagorical, macabre, and all-around horrifying fantasy realm ever conceived, the world of Germanic fairy tales. Little Goody Two-Shoes is what happens when cardcaptor Sakura wanders into Disney's deepest, darkest woods, drops some bad psilocybin, and gets transported into an 18th century European fable, one that's also a low-key horror story starring a gaggle of sapphic teenagers.
Little Goody Two-Shoes by Astral Shift Studio is one of those rare examples of a genuinely pioneering game, one that mashes up and remixes genres that, on the face of things, just seem like they absolutely should not work together. And yet, somehow, the synthesis that results is an even greater and more powerful concoction than we would have gotten if the game had played it safe, stayed in its lane, and stuck with only one genre format or the other. Little Goody Two-Shoes is essentially a riff on and expansion of the developer's first game, the RPG Maker-derived Pocket Mirror, and also serves as a prequel to that title. It's a narratively dense game that plays fast and loose with genre and can best be described as one-half cottagecore slice-of-life simulator and one-half magical girl survival horror puzzle adventure. And it really earns every one of those extravagant descriptors because each half of the ludic experience actually complements and directly affects the other, creating an incredibly effective and compelling gameplay loop. During the slice of life visual novel adventure segments, the daylight half of each of the 7 days you'll play through, you take up the role of Elise, a maid-of-all-work who is coming of age in the alpine Austrian village of Kieferberg. In this mode, you'll gad about town, undertake errands, and do chores for the villagers, which are delightfully rendered here as mini-games played on a super old-timey arcade cabinet. This earns you currency to spend on health and sanity restoratives, and food to maintain Elise's stamina meter, which is slowly ticking down as the phases of each day pass by. And if you don't stock up on enough provisions and your stamina reaches 0, game over awaits, sending you back to your last manual save. Also, keeping your stamina meter full is essential to going on meet-cute dates and romancing the town's other young ladies, which is one of the game's main attractions. There's Rosenmarie, mysterious and esoteric, Freya, the big-hearted and constant gardener, and Lebkuchen, the nun with a wicked sense of humor. The romances are also no sideshow either. Falling in love, or like with your sweetheart, is integral to the game's plot and progression. But this is ultimately a life of menial toil and drudgery for Elise, one that offers her little hope of climbing out of a miserable existence of barely scraping by on gig work. And so, she spends her days dreaming of a better life in an opulent fairy tale castle where she's waited on hand and foot by the same superstitious townspeople who scorn and look down on her. Then, when night falls and the witching hour approaches, the game switches over to the survival horror adventure gameplay mode, where you must work your way through phantasmagorical puzzle dungeons and dodge menacing nightmare beasties along the way. And here is where your health and sanity meters come into play, which once more requires you to be stocked up on supplies in order to survive until dawn. It's a game with both survival and horror mechanics that influence and interact with each other, and yet it's decidedly not a traditional survival horror type of experience. In this way, the game's two halves intertwine both ludically and narratively to form a brilliant, cohesive horror survival experience. And that's no small feat, considering how many different genre elements this game is juggling at any moment. Another central element is Kieferberg's suspicion meter, which will increase or decrease depending on how you interact with the local villagers. If you give justifiably rude responses to their invasive questions, the suspicion meter goes up, or if you swallow your tongue and patiently endure their harassment, the suspicion meter goes down. And as you probably intuited by now, if the meter fills all the way, it's game over and back to your last manual save. Which brings us to maybe the game's absolute strongest constitutive element, the themes. Now, in one sense, this game about magical teenage lesbians is a very straightforward allegory for how suspicions of witchcraft and devil worship have historically been linked to the oppression of all types of marginalized peoples. And yet, Little Goody Two Shoes deserves so much credit for not just taking the easy road of making queer sexuality the root cause of why Elise is so feared, distrusted, and discriminated against. Her marginal position in the village has really nothing to do with overt personal bigotry from any of the townspeople, even the ones who are quick to accuse her of witchcraft. It's actually enormously refreshing just how little of a deal the game makes about the fact that Elise can fall romantically in love with other women. Everyone is allowed to just exist as interesting and well-rounded characters, without having their romantic preferences treated as though that's the center of their world and the sum total of their humanity. It genuinely makes the game feel even more empathetic and relatable, because even if you, the player, aren't queer yourself, you probably still know what it's like to have felt like an unloved outsider at some point in your life. Now, to address the other elephant in the room, you could argue that since the game is being published by the behemoth that is Square Enix, then this technically doesn't qualify as an indie game. But frankly, we live in a time when people are trying to argue with a straight face that Baldur's Gate 3 qualifies as an indie release, and publishers like Humble Games and Annapurna are making the line between indie and AA blurrier than ever. What qualifies to be put under the hazy term indie and what doesn't is a massive can of worms that I won't open here at this time. Fact is, indie publishing exists, and that is by and large a good thing. So while Little Goody Two Shoes did have a limited publishing deal with the company's now defunct Square Enix Collective indie label, that doesn't at all detract from the fact that this is exactly the kind of super inventive, experimental, avant-garde experience from a small team that you can only get from the indie gaming scene. Also, the animation studio Nostalook deserves a nod for their work on the absolutely jaw-dropping opener. From the official anime music video for Dua Lipa's Levitating all the way to Little Goody Two Shoes, the studio is one to keep an eye on. Little Goody Two Shoes is available right now on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch, and is an easy recommendation for fans of experimental and narrative-heavy horror games, magical girl anime, 90s Disney films, and gorgeous visual novels.
Alright, here we are. Thanks for watching to the end. I'm so happy to have finally made another Games from Underground episode. It's been way too long. Truth be told, there were a few factors that contributed to me having to put it on hold for a bit. One of them was things had to be moved and shifted a bit in my home, so I didn't have the backdrop for filming available as I had in the first 4 episodes. Space has been a problem ever since, but for the past months I've been rethinking the whole thing and decided that I want to make it a bit more low-key, not trying to make it look like a discount TV studio, but just take it a bit more easy. And it's not at all perfect yet. For instance, I had planned to include some cool shots on my CRT monitor, especially during the Echostasis Hyperreality segments, but Alas, I was missing some more components for the SLR camera I own that is capable of syncing the frame rate to the monitor's refresh rate. Anyone who's ever tried to record a CRT screen without that knows if you don't do that, it's gonna look pretty shit. But it is what it is. I'm excited to experiment more with future videos. Hopefully, we'll see where things go. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the format and on its execution too. And of course, please keep suggesting indie titles for me to check out. Even though I won't get around to playing every single one for time reasons, I certainly try, and I've already discovered so many gems, both indies and old games, because of your recommendations. So thanks a ton for that. Keep them coming. Now, in case this was your first video of mine, I'm Ragnar, and on this channel we cover old games, indie games, horror games, and combinations thereof. If that sounds like up your alley, go check out my backlog and consider subscribing and putting that bell on if you want to be part of the notification squad. Aside from leaving a like and a comment for engagement, which is highly appreciated, the most crucial way to support this channel, should you want to do so, is by becoming a patron over on my Patreon. I've been working for a while on a library of backer-exclusive bonus videos, including Let's Plays of requested games or games I cover on this channel, and more loosely edited video essays on topics that I don't have the capacity to produce into a regular upload on my channel, or that would thematically clash with the channel's direction. There's one on the lost age of video rentals, for example, and a recent one on Morrowind and why it was such an incredibly formative game in my life. And there's another one planned for later this month. If that is interesting to you, or if you simply want to support the channel out of the goodness of your heart, thank you so much for considering. And with this, I'll say ta-ta for now and leave you with my regular shout out to these generous backers of mine. Jin Hansen, Thwagam, Link Hughes, Thomas Brunner, Gehennas, Dr. Haley Isabella Colley, Dana Rosa, Lillian B, Swiss Hackmod, Morgan K, Felix D, Lucas Ferreira Leite, Catherine Escobar, Zodi, Sable Cow, Billy Lott, LSN HNG, J.R. Smith, Chuck Taylor, Casper Rom, Corey Marr, The Spiral Architect, Ronan Crom, aka Daniel 242172, Vincent Kavanaugh, Shannon Blue, Ari Orison, Terraflops, Tabby, Nikot the Brave, Kenan Ward, John Boring, Kyle Lee, Kerry George, Aurora Melpomene Crescendo, Amber Wiggins, Uziel 1447, Alfred Correa, David Zelenak, Giselle, Sulmatul, Avian the Assassin, Jean, Sunny Sky, Matt Gretton, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, Angelo Benedetti, Tlebin, Chris Z, Vasily Prokhorov, Nathan Gillick, Disco Otter, Nineball 9606, Jordan Gertler, and Laird Wackala. Until next time, ta-ta!